Hello and welcome to this Estranged development blog video. In this video, I'm going to provide you a distraction from the world's events and talk to you about ladders, whilst giving you a sneak preview of some levels from, or this level from Estranged Arctic Cold. Now please don't judge, you may recognize this, it's work in progress. So what I'm going to be showing you here is this ladder. So Estranged the Departure didn't actually have any ladders in it, and that wasn't really a design decision. It was just, I didn't get round to it, I suppose. And there were other ways to represent verticality, but obviously this level, you may recognize it, does have ladders in it, so it's a kind of critical part. So if I approach this ladder, I'm automatically mounted onto it. If I look up, I'm moved up the ladder. If I look down and press W, I'm moved down the ladder. If I reach the bottom, I'm automatically ejected from the ladder. I can jump off the ladder. I can move up to the top, or the most important thing, I can move up to the top and I'm kind of placed at the top. There's quite a harsh transition there, so an improvement would be to make a smooth transition, but that's something that can be done later. The other thing I wanted to show you was, yes, you can also mount the ladder from the side by pressing E. So it's kind of using the interactive framework, and you can also dismount by pressing E, which is different to jumping off because there's no kind of velocity added. So it all works, I think, as you'd expect for a ladder coming from, obviously, Estranged Act 1 and, Source Engine games, Half-Life 2, that kind of thing. Like I said, though, there's rough edges here, and I think it can be improved, but I think the basic mechanics are there. So how does this work? Well, if I have a look at this blueprint, I think this is the right one, just because I had it open. Yeah, it is. You'll see that there's a little bit of setup here, and there's not many components, though. You've got, obviously, the mesh for the ladder. You've got a start position, which the code doesn't care whether this is the top or the bottom, but here it's the bottom. You've got an end position. You've got a box, and that's just the trigger that, kind of mounts the ladder when you're close by. And you've got this capsule, which represents where the player gets off. So very, very simple in terms of setup. If we look at the class here as well, we've got two interfaces implemented. We've got EST Interactive, and that provides the kind of unused methods. We only use the unused method here. And we've got EST Ladder, and this is the thing that lets it work with the ladder system. But it's very, very simple. So if I look at first at unused here, then, when you press E on the ladder, this is the method that gets called because the player is constantly kind of, well, not constantly, but when you press E, it traces. So it figures out, okay, is the thing that I'm looking at an interactive actor? If it is, it calls unused on it. And all we do is just say, okay, character movement, mount the ladder, and it's me. So that's essentially how that's working. The other thing that's interesting here is the ladder interface. So let's look at get ladder extents first. Dead simple. All it's doing is saying, okay, well, when I want to get the ladder extents, and the character movement component will be doing this, all it needs to do is return its start and end positions, and that's it. It's done. In world space as well. We'll come back to the kind of logic beneath this, but in world space. The other thing going on is on dismount. So here you can see, okay, well, we've got this capsule component. When we dismount, we need to set the location of the player to that capsule when they reach the end of the ladder. And we'll talk about this dismount reason a little bit more. So in terms of the blueprint, that's pretty much what's going on. And I'll talk about why it's like this at the end of or close to the end of the video. So we've demoed it. We've looked at the blueprint, how you actually use this in the editor. Now let's look at the code, the exciting bit. I'm going to start with EST Ladder. So we just looked at these methods in blueprints. This is the code level interface. So EST Ladder, you've got to kind of have this pairing of the Unreal kind of U interface and the I interface. So here's where the methods are kind of defined. So you've got F ladder extents. This is this structure up here. And all it's got in it is start position, end position, and get ladder direction. So get ladder direction, very, very simple maths, but it's used in a lot of places, so why repeat it everywhere? On dismount, this is the method that the blueprint was implementing as well. So it gets past a character, a dismount reason, and the dismount reason here is an enum defined above it. So a dismount reason could be that you reach the start of the ladder, you reach the end, and bear in mind in blueprints, the blueprint decides what's the start and the end. I intentionally didn't call this like top and bottom, for example, so it's a bit agnostic. Reached floor, that is a kind of defined thing. You hit the floor, and that's a kind of concept that the U character movement component isn't always aware of, so we'll talk about that. And also another reason could be that the user just ejected. So let's look at the character movement component in Estranged, which is where all of this logic is going. Now, this class used to be much bigger because I'd conflated some things way back when, made some bad decisions, and put the footstep playing logic in the character movement component, which doesn't really make a lot of sense with hindsight, so I removed it. And footstep logic, the thing that's responsible for playing footsteps while you're walking, that's in this completely separate interface now called EST footstep component. So the idea is if you've got a humanoid character, you just throw this component onto it, tell it where the manifest of footstep sounds is, and then you're done. So no interaction with any of the other kind of gameplay framework, which is how it should be. It's just an effects class. Looking at UEST character movement component then, let's look at what happens when you mount the ladder. So pretty simple. What it does is it checks if we got called with a valid object. It will set the current ladder to this new ladder, and that's just a method that does an assignment, and that's done. It will also set the custom movement mode. So this custom movement mode that we've defined in this class, so if I just go and click on it here, you see it opened the header for EST character movement component. We've only got move ladder in here. We've got move none and move ladder, and obviously the maximum enum value. So that's all that's going on there. Maybe we'll gain more in the future. Who knows? So you set the custom movement mode, and this is a method, let's just click on it, that just kind of calls down to the U character movement component, which is the Unreal Engine logic now. And it says, okay, I've got a custom movement mode, and this is it as a uint 8. So the U character movement component just knows about a uint 8, and we know about the enum. So it's quite an extensible system, really. So if I go back, we've now kind of told it that we're in this movement mode. Now we need to snap the player to the ladder. So this logic is currently in here. So what it's doing there is getting the ladder extents, figuring out that line in 3D space that represents the direction of the ladder, getting the player position, figuring out, okay, well, what's the difference between that and the start, and then projecting the player onto the ladder. And finally, it will figure out the nearest point from that. So now we can just kind of set the actor location. And like I said, this is ripe for, a little kind of transition animation in the future. Right now, it's just directly setting the actor location, and that's okay. The other thing we're doing is just kind of storing an initial ladder relative position. That's for moving ladders, which are supported. I'm not going to demo them today, but that's an interesting capability that we might use in the future. The other thing that we're doing here as well is just saying, okay, well, the player's on the ladder now, so they don't need any velocity to just kind of stop some funky stuff going on with physics. So we just set the velocity to 0. So that's mounting. Now we're mounted. Unreal Engine pretty much calls us via the phys custom method. So this is something that gets exposed by the U character movement component, and we're just implementing it. So Unreal says, okay, you're in move_custom mode. I don't know anything about that, so you're going to have to take that in your character movement component. So what we're doing here is saying, okay, great. We're in custom movement mode. I'm going to figure out which custom movement mode we're in. And obviously we've just got one here. So you kind of cast the uint 8, which is stored by the main character movement component, to your custom enum. So now you know which custom movement mode you're in, and then you can call your own method. So in Unreal Engine, you've got like Fizz Walk, Fizz Fly, there's some others. So I figured Fizz Ladder is the right term for this, right method name. So this is what gets called every frame. So there's a little bit of rate limiting here, so it doesn't get called too frequently. There's kind of a min tick time. There's also here some checking. I copied this check from other Fizz movement methods. So I don't know the intricacies of what this does, but it seemed sensible from a glance. So, that's kind of, a little bit of early out if things aren't right. And that seems to work fine. So I didn't think about it too much. Then we check if the ladder that we're, the current ladder, which is actually a U object at this point. That's just how T-script interface works. You get a U object. So we just want to do a bit of a sanity check so we don't get kind of crashes or anything like that. Is this really a UEST ladder? Are you sure this is a ladder that you've given me? And if it's not, you log a warning and then you reset back to walking or whatever the default mode is, and then set the current ladder to null. Then we need to actually, process the ladder movement. So again, running every frame. What we're doing here is figuring out the ladder extents again. So you call the kind of get ladder extents. You figure out the ladder direction from that using the helper method. Then you want to get the world space input vector. So if I'm holding W, this will represent the world space direction that the player wants to travel. You also want the kind of forward vector for that as well, or the scalar, the input-based movement direction. So let's go into that a little bit. So what's this doing? It's doing different things whether you've got a vertical or horizontal ladder. Yes, this supports horizontal ladders. I went there. I over-engineered it as such. It was fun. So let's go into calculate vertical input here. We'll look at the input vector, and this is the code responsible for figuring out, okay, well, I'm pressing W and I'm looking up, so I need to go up, or I'm pressing W and I'm looking down, so I need to go down. So if the input direction is greater than 0, and this means W is being pressed essentially, then you need to figure out the pitch of the camera, and it does that using the control rotation up here. So it figures out the pitch radians, so we've got something to work with here in terms of the pitch. And if it's greater than 0, then okay, continue to go up, it's 1. If it's less than 0, i.e. you're looking down, then it's -1, and return that. If you're holding S, you always move down the ladder, regardless of where the camera is looking. So that's kind of how this logic is set up at the minute. And if it can't figure things out, it'll just return 0. So going back there, we have a scalar then at that point that figures out, it kind of dictates where we're going, whether we're going up or down, or, towards the start or towards the end, to use kind of ladder orientation agnostic language. So the first thing we'll do is check whether we're still inside the ladder, because, if we hit the start or we hit the end, we want to dismount. So what's going on here? Okay, so here it's checking the distance from the start. If that's greater than the ladder length, then we say dismount ladder because we reach the end. And just very quickly, dismount ladder, it calls the blueprint, or it calls the interface method on dismount, and then it sets you back to walking and gets rid of the ladder. So the movement component is kind of reset at this point. Very, very simple. So that's reach end, and also distance from end. If that's greater than the ladder length, then you reach the start. So these are kind of early outs here. And if these don't pass, then you're still on the ladder. So that's how that's working. If I go back, there's another check here, which is, have you hit the floor? So this only works if it's a vertical ladder at the minute, because horizontal ladder, it's a bit weird. So if we go into check floor dismount, this is just using logic that U character movement component has already. So what it'll do is it'll call find floor, and what you get back from that is this find floor result. And very, very simple, you just say, okay, well, is it a walkable floor, All right, yes, then it's time to dismount because you reached the floor. Super, super simple. Leveraging the Unreal Engine logic here. I'm not going to talk about this too much because this is for movable ladders and this could change in the future. And, we don't have an example of a movable ladder. It's a bit conceptual at this point. But it does work. I have tested it. This is the main ladder movement logic here. So it's figuring out, okay, well, we've got a variable on character movement component, which is ladder climb speed. From that climb speed and the input and the ladder direction multiplied by delta time to keep it frame rate independent. Okay, what kind of input movement do I have? And I add that to the total movement that I'm going to apply. So if there is movement here to apply, so, if you're just idling on the ladder, this won't execute. What it'll do is it'll just say, okay, safe move updated component, and, it will pass you the delta that you want to apply and the rotation, and then that will actually move the player. And this is just using U movement component. So there's a whole hierarchy here, as there often is in Unreal Engine, where you've got kind of U movement component, which is inherited by U character movement component, and then obviously at the end here you've got U EST character movement component that has access to all of the methods from the aforementioned classes. And obviously there's a hierarchy above that, which is fun, and I don't think I could recount what's above that at the top of my head. Anyway, probably that's a good thing. So then what we do here is, this is just for, we've moved the player at that point, we're kind of done, but there's this bit of logic here for movable ladders. So, not going to talk about that too much because we've not demoed it. So we're pretty much done at this point. And the last thing I wanted to just show you very, very quickly is the jump implementation here. So jump pressed. Currently the player is responsible for this bit. So if you press jump and you're climbing a ladder, then what it'll do is it'll say, okay, dismount the ladder, the user ejected, and it will apply the velocity. So the character movement component doesn't really have anything to do with that. It's the player at the minute. I'm not sure if I'm completely happy with this, but it works for now. The other thing I will interact pressed. It is. So interact pressed in EST player. This is what happens when you press E when you're on the ladder. So currently when you press E and you're climbing the ladder, then that will dismount the ladder too. And obviously it won't apply the velocity, and that's why you kind of fall to the floor. So that's how that's working. I think I've covered pretty much everything in this class now. So I'm going to switch back, and I'm just going to show you the ladder underneath the water, just to kind of prove that, that works as well. So let's go into the water here, go up to the ladder, you get mounted automatically, you reach the top, and there you go. You exit the ladder. So all working with, different movement modes as you'd expect. And that's ladders in Estranged Arctic Cold with a preview of Estranged Arctic Cold. Thank you very much for watching.